Okay, we'll be starting in just a second. Bear with me. Ah, we'll just start now. It's going to put you on the other machine, but I think this one might work. Okay, well, we have as many people online, maybe more than we have in the room, but I'm going to start with questions from the room, and then we'll go to questions online. If you ask questions online, please turn your camera on for that so I can see you when you're asking. That'll help. Okay, I said I did a review session by just opening the floor for questions. So floor is open for questions.
Can you kind of explain or review the difference between the crime of war and war crimes?
Okay, so the crime of war belongs to which? Jus ad bellum or jus in bello? Ad bellum, right. So that's the crime of going to war. That's aggression. Aggression is the crime of war. Aggression is the crime of war. And war crimes are jus in bello, right. That's particular acts that are illegal or violate the rules of war. So, okay, yeah.
Can you elaborate on the requirements to declare a supreme emergency?
Okay, well, since supreme emergency involves overriding the conditions in which one can override the rule of war, it's not exactly a legal condition, right? So it's not that there are these circumstances that if you satisfy them, then the law is officially suspended. I mean, Walzer's talking about it as a matter of morality. And so, but in general, a supreme emergency would be a situation in which your country is facing not only defeat in war, but the kind of defeat which would destroy your country and everything it stands for. So, you know, for several hundred years, the British and the French fought wars against one another. The territorial lines tended to move back and forth a little bit. But Walzer's argument is that the victory of Germany in one of those particular wars wasn't fatal to France, and the particular Germany, the victory of France in one of those wars wasn't fatal to Germany in a way. So there was no supreme emergency in those wars. And in a way, you recognize that because these would be situations in which a country can imagine surrendering in a war. You surrender, you come to terms with peace, you come to peace terms with the other side. You know, it's a very interesting question whether the war between Ukraine and Russia right now is a war that Walzer would think could ever constitute a supreme emergency. Maybe it would if the Russians were moving on Ukraine and seeking to take away their whole independence as a people. You know, that he might not, he might say they could reach a moment of supreme emergency there. But on the whole, wars that are fought that involve a little gain or a little loss of territory, I don't think he sees as qualifying for this sort of override of the War Convention, which is what supreme emergency allows. So, right, so he doesn't think, in his judgment, that the situation the Americans faced in Japan in the summer of 1945 was a supreme emergency. Our country was not any longer in danger. We were at the beginning of the war, but we fought it as a war. We fought it at sea. It was a very hard fought war and a very bloody war, but mostly between combatants. And until the Americans decided they needed unconditional surrender. And that's where his argument is. We should have been satisfied with something less than unconditional surrender. Now, I don't know if that argument really works because it's not clear that the Japanese would ever have surrendered, short of an invasion. And it was very clear that an invasion after Okinawa, I was reading something about it the other day. After Okinawa, it was very clear that an invasion would probably lead to several million deaths between Japanese and Americans and civilians and the like. So that was the argument that they used for the use of the atomic bomb, which was a weapon that in itself would violate the War Convention because it's not a weapon that can be sufficiently aimed, at least not ordinarily. Now, the development of the weapon was in a moment of supreme emergency. That's the irony of it, because it was the reason Einstein went to President Roosevelt and said, you need to support the people who know enough that they could develop a super weapon. The reason they did that was because they had a sense the Germans could possibly have been developing this weapon. I mean, they knew the physicists had all been in conversation with one another. Heisenberg was on the German side. He was one of the leading physicists at the time. And Einstein had left Germany, and as had some others. But at that point, they were afraid if the Nazis got the bomb, that would be a supreme emergency. And so the development of the weapon, it's kind of ironic, right? That the development of the weapon could have been justified by supreme emergency, but by the time of its use, the Germans had already been defeated. And it turns out they even knew partway through that the Germans were going the wrong way on it. Did you see the movie Oppenheimer? If you saw that, there's a moment in the movie where someone is defected from Germany, and Oppenheimer, I think it is, asks him, what are they saying about this? And he realizes they're going in the wrong direction. And at that point, I think Walser says this somewhere, they actually should have stopped developing the weapon, but that was probably not humanly likely because they were in the middle of this whole campaign to develop the weapon. And what if the Germans had figured it out then and realized they were on the wrong path and got out? Or, as happened with the Russians, got through a spy, got the information from the Americans. That's how the Russians got the bomb earlier. It's not that they had simply brilliant. They had plenty of brilliant scientists because the information wouldn't help them otherwise, but they stole it from a spy who was working in and slipped into Los Alamos, part of the team. The movie played that down a little bit. It might have changed the way you viewed Oppenheimer and the others if they'd included. Good question. What else? Yes.
Just kind of confused on like the differences between like classical, modern, and then neoliberalism. How those all different. Okay, like where they differ.
Classical, modern, and
Neoliberal.
neoliberals. Very good. So classical liberalism is the liberalism of Hayek, and he thinks the liberalism of John Locke and Adam Smith. Now, it might be that the modern classical liberalists don't insist on saying this is somehow anchored in natural right. It might be enough to say it's a coherent ideology that can stand on its own without some sort of grounding in nature. But nevertheless, in terms of the decisions, it's the okay, someone wants captions. Let's see if we can do that. It's the liberalism of individual rights, free markets, and a government that restricts its aim to protecting markets and rights, ensuring the rule of law in Hayek's other formulation. Modern liberalism, to Dewey, is the way the term tends to be used generally in American discourse when we talk about liberals versus conservatives. Modern liberalism is close to democratic socialism, although maybe sometimes the term socialism suggests public ownership of the means of production, and American liberals were interested in setting up a welfare state. They were interested in the heavy regulation of industry and of the economy, but not necessarily that regulation, it required ownership. Could be enough to regulate how much people could earn in terms of profits and the like without actually taking their property, make it work for the government. Neoliberalism is a term that was used mostly in Europe and in relation to international affairs. And it refers really to the sort of restoration of classical liberalism, or at least of some classical liberal ideas in the 1990s and early 2000s. A return to a general presumption in favor of free trade, a return to a general presumption in favor of the private ownership of capital and of free markets, value of free markets. So the neoliberals never grounded their thought on notions of natural rights or of a system of natural liberty. So in that sense, maybe you could say Hayek is a neoliberal because he isn't concerned with, at least not explicitly, with working out a sort of philosophical grounding. So sometimes Hayek is referred to as an early neoliberal. And it's certainly true that the neoliberals of the 1990s and early 2000s were great admirers of Hayek and of some of the other theorists in the school. So I didn't use the term neoliberal, but it is a little confusing, right? Because what's the new liberalism for Dewey is not neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is a later return to classical liberalism. But here's the catch, that for Dewey, right, science responds to changing in the circumstances. And if it's discovered that the movement of let's call it regulatory liberalism that he promotes, in fact, leads to a stagnant economy that is no longer serving its purpose, Dewey himself would have agreed that policies have to change. So it's not impossible that Dewey would have been a neoliberal in the 1990s. But then after the crash of 2008, have switched back to a progressive. And they revived the term progressive, so it's called progressive liberal. Dewey would have called himself a progressive as well as a liberal. And his liberalism is really a kind of progressivism. But Hayek might get upset at that use of the term because his view was real progress comes through the free market. So he wouldn't think Dewey has the right to call himself the only progressive. That's the source of real progress. But today's progressive is much more like Dewey's new liberal. Yes.
What is Dewey's main argument in this book?
His main argument is that a free market economy served an important purpose in breaking down traditional society and, as it were, unleashing unleashing the productive capacities of human beings. By the way, Marx would agree with this one. But that Dewey thinks that those achievements are, by the beginning of the 20th century, all in the past. At this point, free market thinking is an obstacle to progress rather than an engine of progress. It once was the engine of progress. Now it's become an obstacle of progress. Why? Well, because great disparities of wealth had developed, and a kind of inequality that resembled feudal society was reinvented by the capitalists. So that in fact, the worker in a factory was no better off, maybe even worse off than the serf had been on the estate. Because he didn't have a future promise to him. He didn't have a place to live, a home on an estate. And his earnings were pretty limited. He disagrees with Marx. He rejects Marxism, the notion that the harsh condition of labor in the late 19th century, or what he sees as the harsh condition of labor in the late 19th century, is just going to get worse and worse and bring about a revolution that's going to overturn capitalist society. Dewey doesn't agree with that. He thinks that the condition of labor can be ameliorated. It can be made better through reform. And that's what he's proposing. But the reforms he proposes involve social planning, so central planning of the economy by the government. And that's what he calls for. And he thinks that this is consistent with democracy, at least with democracy understood in a progressive sense. Progressive democracy won't get caught up with the old details of representative government that we're going to study in a few weeks, but is open to new ways of communication between the government and the people. A sort of back and forth involved in the development of public opinion. Yes.
Could you speak to double effect and kind of its role in the war convention?
Okay, so double effect is a principle or an idea Walzer uses to explain why it is that the killing of civilians, the foreseeable killing of civilians might not violate the war convention. Now, the intended killing of civilians does violate the war convention. But it's foreseeable sometimes that when you engage in legitimate acts of war, there can be collateral damage, right? That isn't intended, but you can see it's going to happen. It's likely to happen. Or it's likely to happen if civilians are somehow in the battlefield, right? So you can foresee, it's a general point, right? You can foresee that if civilians get on the battlefield, they're going to get hurt. Somebody's going to get hurt, and it's not just going to be civil, right? That's foreseeable. So that would also mean it's foreseeable if somehow an urban area becomes the battlefield, any civilians that are still in the urban area are going to be greatly at risk. And the principle of double effect says, okay, they're going to be at risk, but that doesn't mean you have to stop fighting because your enemy is now, just because your enemy has stepped into an urban area or retreated to an urban area or starting a fight in an urban. So what he says you have to do is you have to be sure you're not intending to destroy the civilians. You're not aiming at the civilians, you're aiming at legitimate military targets. You have to make some effort to target more precisely, even at some risk to yourself, to avoid harming civilians. And you have to make sure that the damage, the collateral damage is not disproportionate to the war aim. Right, so it's not that you could kill 1 million civilians in order to save their country for them, or defeat 1,000 troops. But there are no precise numbers by which you can measure that, no precise algorithm by which you can measure. So, to take the hard cases of, say, Israel and Gaza, the Israeli claim is always that they're aiming at military targets, not at civilian targets, but that the Hamas militants are either hiding among the civilians or specifically setting themselves up in such a way as to, with no regard to the lives of their own civilians, to invite the Israelis um, uh, to accidentally but foreseeably cause civilian damage. So, for example, by putting rocket launchers on top of hospitals, which apparently they do. So in war, you would have to be able to knock out a rocket launcher. But if the rocket launcher's on top of the hospital, it might be hard not to hit that, not to do damage to the hospital while you take out the rocket launcher, right? But it's a hard case, but at least Walzer would say at least the principles are clear in it, even though sorting it out case by case and instance by instance might be difficult. Did I see another question here in the group here?
I guess I
Yeah.
would just ask, like, how do you think Walzer would want to go about like settling the dispute like that? Like, if it's tumultuous like that, how do you figure out what's a justifiable trade-off?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not quite sure what he would say in the end. I mean, there's one, when you look at what he says about Vietnam and how, I mean, there he's confident the Americans did not have the support of the local population. I'm not sure what he would say in a circumstance where you've got a group like Hamas that you're fighting against. That really seems to be perfectly happy to waste the lives of the people they are supposedly governing and defending. But because this is a group that has launched an attack, a serious attack on Israel with complete disregard for. Well, I mean, it was be wrong as a matter of jus et bellum their attack, presumably, and then they flagrantly violated jus et bellum because they were murdering the babies and civilians. So this is not an enemy that shows any interest really in either side of justice at war. But on the other hand, he doesn't say that you can do anything you want when you're dealing with folks like that. So I don't know if he would say at a certain point they just have to stop fighting and try some other tactic or wait out something else. I don't know. I'm not sure what he would say. There's some hints he might say something like that, or that their attempt to thoroughly root out Hamas can't be done justly. I mean, what he says is if you can't fight a war justly, you shouldn't fight it. And presumably he means Israel would have to figure out some other way of defending themselves. Okay, so put up better fences, guard the border better, or whatever it would be. I think that's what he might say, but I don't think he's written on it. I don't know if he's still writing it. Last thing I saw him write was a few years ago. So I'm not sure, but that's the way he would think it out. Because he does say at one point, right, that if you can't fight the war justly, it's time to stop fighting. I mean, your aim is too much. They're aiming at too much to fully eradicate these folks, even if they're evil folks. You cannot eradicate evil from the world, all evil from the world, right? Because that's that phrase, remember this one, fiat justitia pereat mundi, let justice be done though the heavens fall. Walzer says that just leads to slaughter. So there are times when you just can't achieve even a just aim. I don't think he would doubt it would be a just aim to be able to, in general, to be able to destroy the Hamas fighters. They don't seem willing to ever surrender. So, yes.
I just wanted to say Walzer did an hour and 15-minute interview 10 months ago specifically about the.
Oh, did he? Okay. Well, send me the link to it. I'll post it after the exam. I don't want people to get distracted. but I hadn't seen it. Good. Okay.
Can you reiterate the differences between the realism and the relativism argument that Walzer
Okay.
expands on?
So the realist says that in war, you can't make moral judgments. The relativist says you can't make moral judgments. Who am I to judge, right? Moral judgments can't be made about things because people have different values or cultures have different values. And the only kind of moral judgments that might be possible will be within a culture. That's the relativist. The realist doesn't deny that you can make moral judgments about ordinary life, but says that war is an extreme case, and all ordinary life depends upon the defense of the country and therefore upon the suspension of war, if not peace. And in war, the realist says it's just not useful to talk about moral judgments. States are going to do whatever they have to because they're always war. I guess their argument is war is the supreme emergency. And so the rules don't apply. That's what the realists would say. And insofar as Walzer acknowledges the fact of supreme emergency, he's accepting something from realism. But he wants to limit it as far as he can and say it's only facing the enemy with whom you could never make any kind of peace pact because you know they would never honor it. Right? There's no sense. I mean, would be a general truth. You don't want to surrender to someone who's then going to kill prisoners. Soldiers would surrender when they're confident that the foe that they're fighting is going to respect prisoners. And Walzer says states do. They fight wars. They take prisoners of war. They respect those. So that shows that in practice, it actually can be done and is done and has been done. It's also true in practice. People often push the limits of those things. So in practice, people kill prisoners too, prisoners of war. But he thinks it's enough that you can. People talk about this as if it makes a difference, and in practice, it often has. So that's why he doesn't think of himself as either a realist or a relativist. Right? Walzer is neither. Even though he acknowledges that in supreme emergency, a state's going to do whatever it has to survive. And even though he's certainly aware that different cultures have different values on a lot of matters, he just wants to say that these basic points of aggression and defense, that's universal, he wants to say. Good question. Yes.
Can you go more into
Okay, so the legalist paradigm is the analogy, I guess, between domestic law and morality and going to war. So it's useful, paradigm is a model, so it's useful insofar as it points out what's similar and what's different between the situation of war and ordinary situations involving crime. Right, so what's similar is that there's wrong and the wrongs can be punished. Right, so that aggression is a crime. And that crime can be punished. Well, you can resist the criminal in the moment of the crime, right? Which is true in general with regard to crime. You don't lose your right to self-defense. And then the criminal can be punished. The difference, of course, is that there's no authority outside of the member states to whom you can appeal, except world opinion in a general sort of way. So in self-defense, right, you can resist a criminal in self-defense, but you can't punish a criminal. You could resist it, but once there's no more resistance, once you've successfully resisted the criminal, then the business of punishment is not up to you. You know, you can't go get your cousins and go say, okay, we're going to kill this guy. No, that's up to the state now, right? You bring it to the authorities who hold a trial and then punish the crime, right? If the person's found guilty. And that's very different. That's where the paradigm doesn't work in that way. But he likes it because it points out the importance of there being a society of nations and of the fact that there is a general sense that there are crimes that one nation can commit against another, and that others can come to the defense of that, of the one who is who can both come to the defense and that society can punish them. It's just that the society doesn't involve an authority like a court, much less an executive. So it's just the same thing. It's getting your cousins, so to speak, and helping to resist and then punish. So he goes through what he calls the 6 elements, right? The 6 particular points of the legalist paradigm. And where's that? Let me get a page number on that. Chapter 4, right? Page 58 in the pages that follow. Okay, that helps on that? Okay. Other questions? You folks online, other questions, you're free to ask. There's a put up the hand button, or you can just turn on your camera and ask me a question. I think I've got it so that you can unmute yourselves if you want. Who else? Yes.
So I think it's basically saying that like it's okay for there to be basic rules in society, like food, education, like employment, housing, so like that's where it ends. He says that like anything beyond that is too much control.
Well, those would be basic provisions you need from society. Yeah, the rules are one thing, right? But the basic provisions, he's willing. So Hayek does not say food stamps would be illegitimate, right? I mean, that's to prevent hunger. Society's wealthy enough it can do that. And I don't even know. I mean, housing's maybe a little more complicated, but he doesn't rule it out. But what he's afraid of is that people will, the whole machine for creating wealth is going to break down if lots of people just rely on what the state provides them. So I think he'd be kind of happy with the situation, not too far from what the situation is now, that these benefits are available, but they're never a lot. And they're never really that easy. So, okay, now we've got a couple questions online. So Madison, did you want to go first?
Yeah, so I had a question. So you said that Hayek was a liberal, right?
I think yes, that Hayek's been called a neoliberal, but I think he would have called himself a classical liberal.
Because didn't he disagree with it, saying that it could lead to totalitarianism, or was that something else?
That it could lead to what?
Total, I can't pronounce it. Total terrorism.
Oh, totalitarianism.
Yeah, that's how you say it.
No. That's his disagreement with the planned economy, right? Neoliberalism is not about a planned economy, right? It's about, at least, it's about reopening the free market. Usually it was applied in countries that had had a heavily regulated economy, and then the regulations get lifted. So in the United States, an early neoliberal policy was the deregulation of the airline industry in the late 1970s. It used to be that all the routes that the planes flew and how often and even the prices were all regulated by the federal government. And then the federal government pulled out of that and allowed for much more competition on prices and more competition for routes. They still have to, I mean, the federal government still runs the airports, right? And you can only, they do have to coordinate how many planes are coming in at any time, because you don't want too many planes coming in that have, I mean, you can't land two planes at the same time, right? So there has to be some coordination there. Well, I mean, you can if you have two different runways. You ever been to an airport that's that big that it has two runways? They come in next to each other. You go to San Francisco is the one I remember seeing it. And it's a little unnerving at first because there's a plane right next to you. And you think, ooh, you're gonna have to share the runway or what's going on? But it turns out they're two parallel runways. And they'll often bring them in together because then they can follow it together. So that was an example. There are other countries where there was deregulation of, well, there was extensive deregulation of the, around the same time of the telephone industry. That tended to be a monopoly in most places, a public service like water service or gas service or electricity, which is often a public service in most places. And that is, say, there's a monopoly provider that's heavily regulated by the state. And the same was true of telephones for a while, but then the government stopped that, broke up AT&T, allowed for more competition at first on interstate lines, and then there came the whole development of cell phones, and even though there the government's involved in setting up the frequencies and selling the frequencies, nevertheless, it's an environment in which there's extensive competition. And Hayek would be in favor of that. You know, technologically, he would say it proves you don't need a monopoly, even if you have to have a general regulation of the airwaves or frequencies. That doesn't mean you have to have a monopoly of the frequencies. You can auction off different frequencies and people can own different frequencies, and that's what's happened, what the government's done. So, so that would be a neoliberal policy. The term is neo because it was a return to, insofar as it's a return to classical liberalism from an age that had abandoned it. Does that help?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, good. Krisha Wandalin, is that it? You want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question, Ms. Clark? Can you find the mute button or the unmute button? She had her hand up. Okay, well, we're not hearing you if you're speaking. I don't know. See if that helps. Yeah, no, can't do it. Okay, other questions? Yeah, okay, no, now you've muted. You unmuted for a second there. Okay, she's having trouble.
Hello, sir.
There you are. Okay, that's all right. Yeah, yeah, you go when you. Okay, now we can hear you. Go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, so Dewey says classical liberalism had to evolve from modern liberalism. And would you consider that transformation one of the key concepts we should be able to identify on the exam?
Yes, I think that's fair enough. Dewey's notion of modern liberalism, or he calls it Renaissance liberalism.
Renaissance.
Right. And what's the key to it? Well, that it maintains the basic liberal values, right? Liberty, free intelligence, and self-development, but it does it through new kinds of public policies, through a coordinated action of the government rather than through letting the market, competition in the market, work things out among people. Because Dewey thinks competitions become wasted, and needs to be replaced with cooperation or coordination.
Thank you so much.
Okay, that helps. Okay, good. Good. Anybody else online or anybody else here? Yes, the price system. Good, one of my favorites. Okay. So here's Hayek's argument that the beauty of prices is that they capture lots and lots of information. In other words, I don't know. Suppose you need tires for your car. Well, you don't have to know how hard it is to get the rubber. Actually, it's probably a synthetic rubber. You don't have to know how to make the synthetic rubber. You don't have to know how to build plies on the car or what kind. All you have to know is how much they cost, because all of those things of how difficult or how complex or how new and innovative or how well established the process is for making tires, all of that is built into the price. Now the price, and that's all you have to know. And then you make a judgment of whether or not you can afford the tires. Now, obviously, it's kind of ridiculous to have a car without tires. But there are different ways of getting tires. You could buy used tires. You could buy retread tires, but those you can't drive on the highway at high speeds because the tires come off. You see them on the highways all the time because people obviously do it. But you can buy more expensive tires and less expensive tires, right? More expensive tires last longer, et cetera. But all the information about that tire at some level is into the price. I mean, you want to know why the price is what it is, right? Is this so cheap because it's a poor kind of rubber? Or is it cheap because it's not as thick? It isn't going to last as many miles or something. Okay, fine. You figure that out. But it's the pricing of different goods that allows for the coordination between all buyers and sellers. And so most items you have, there are very few items that you have where somebody, maybe a few craft goods, where somebody simply gathered the natural material and then made the item. Most things are made from other things that somebody made, that themselves are made from other things that somebody made, right? So you get all these layers that go into the manufacture of it. And so all of the key to the price system is that all the information that's involved in all of that if someone were trying to plan, they'd have to have all that information or try to digest all the information. And Hayek says, don't bother. All you have to know is, what's the price? Now, you've got to add to the price. I mean, part of that system is this law of supply and demand, right? The fact that if prices are high, more people are going to be drawn to supplying that matter. And if the supply is high, the price is going to go down because people won't be able to sell it. It'll be left over. So somebody will put something on sale, right? Up too many tires, so now they have to lower the price of some of the tires to clear out their inventory. And so an equilibrium is reached in prices all the time. And in a way, just knowing the price of things is mostly what you need to know in order to, that's what people need to know in order to act in the market. They just have to know how much it costs. Now they have to know all the costs. What are the costs of getting the thing to where you need it and so forth, right? So then you might find cheap tires, but if they're in Texas and your car's here without tires, it's not going to do you any good unless you get them shipped for not too much, etc. And figuring out the prices will tell you all those things, calculation you have to make. So it becomes this way, it becomes the way in which the activities of millions of people get coordinated. It's not just the prices, I mean, it's the prices and then the exchange that takes place as a result of the prices. But all that information gets packed into a price. So we think of the price, I mean, and therefore, you see, I think sometimes people have a tendency to think prices are arbitrary. And so, especially when you see them change, right? You think it's just, well, why are they changing? Why are the gas prices up? Why are they down? But actually, the prices are conveying information that you otherwise wouldn't have. Like, there are refineries that are closed now for some reason or another, and so there's not as much oil available, and you're going to have to pay more for what's there. But because the prices are up, there's an incentive to get that refinery opened again, right? And so on and so forth. Does that make sense of how it works? Yes.
I know we've covered it today, but could you explain more on like why Hyatt thought like private property ownership was so important? Why private ownership was that really important?
Oh, right. Well, what's the alternative to private ownership? Well, presumably social ownership. And then the question is, who's managing that? And see, when you own something, you determine its use. You determine whether you're going to sell it or not. Right? You can't sell something you don't own. You know that, right? Don't try to do it. There was something hilarious in the paper yesterday of some woman who was convicted of selling something that, but I'm forgetting what it was. Did you see what was the item? I don't remember what it was. It was something that, how could she sell this? It was obvious she wouldn't have owned it, but it was like a bridge or something like this. It was really, I don't know why anybody would even try to, I don't remember what it was. It sounded crazy, but maybe that was just the way the news media presented it. She might have, but she was faking out that she was faking people into thinking she owned something that she didn't own to get them to sell. But if there's not private ownership, everything breaks down in Hayek's system, because the exchanges are no longer your choice to buy and sell, but someone else's choice of where the credits go by what you do, or what you've done or what they think you've done. So, I mean, it happens all the time that things get distributed in a kind of way. I mean, there are different modes of distribution than pricing. Sometimes they take place within entities that generally depend on pricing. Right. So within your family, the food is distributed however your family distributes the food. If there's plenty, maybe there's no rule. But if there's only one teenage boy in the house, there are probably rules that he can't finish the such and such or finish all the such and such, because otherwise he would. I was there once, I understand. So, and then I've had some teenage boys. So you gotta share in some, okay, so there are rules within the house. That's one thing. And that's probably not done by pricing. Unless you have adult kids, then maybe someone's being asked if they're living at home to share in the expenses. But in general, it's not a matter of distribution by some central authority, whether it's the parent or, I was thinking, what about the housing office at LSU, right? I imagine you probably, I don't even know what you do to get, you live on campus, any of you live on campus? So if you live on campus, you probably put into the housing office and what kind of dorm you're willing to live in. There are probably different prices for the different ones, but they still have to parcel it out according to vacancies and so forth. But they probably do use something of a price system, right? So if you want to live in the ones with, like it's a quad with a kitchen or something, I don't know if you have that, but the different kinds of ways that usually they've actually developed sort of a market for that. When I was in college, everybody just had a room. Well, no, the issue there was, I think you paid a flat price for it too. the issue was a single room or double. And maybe there were even a few triples, but that was parceled out that you had to be a junior or senior to be even able to request a single or something. Then it was small. But now you have more options and there's some pricing involved in. And I mean, it's not going to be infinite pricing, probably, right? It's not probably leases, right? You can't, it probably is not such that you could say to the housing office that you really like where this person, you've been in their room and that's really great. So you're going to offer $50 more for that room next month, right? You probably can't do, I hope you can't do anything like that because then you could throw each other out of your rooms in the middle of a term. You probably have a lease. Okay, a lease is something that's developed in a market. So see, the markets provide for stability as well as change. And Hayek says there's nothing wrong with stability. There's nothing wrong with contracts for several years at a time. There's nothing wrong with leases. It's not ownership, but well, it's ownership of the right to use something for a particular amount of time, a lease, right? I mean, there are limits on it. On what you could do with your room, I suppose. But all of that is what he's talking about. As long as there's some kind of market mechanism there, then that's apt to be more or less fair. And even if you complain about the cost, if you complain about the cost of the room, a place like here, there are lots of other housing options. I went to school up in the middle of the country, and you were either there or you were in some basement, maybe if you were lucky, but there weren't many houses outside of college. So this was a rural college, but so they could have that kind of system where they basically had you. But you've got other options. So housing at LSU is obviously going to have to keep competitive with what the other options are on the market. Right? There's some advantages to being on campus because you're closer to classes and you don't have to worry about parking to get to class, etc. Right? So all of this, once you start looking for these things, you realize there are all these markets that are operating around you and you're already a part of. You don't have to think about it every day if these things are settled. You've figured out at particular points. And I think Hayek would say all of that is fine. It's just if you want the college rooms to get nicer over time, you better have something competitive around. Sometimes the competition is between colleges. Actually, that's gotten kind of ridiculous, I think, at some colleges. So they start building all these extras around college to try to attract people to the college. And, they may not be attracted by the quality of the professoriate or the professors, or it's hard to judge. Easier to judge, wow, they have a lazy river. LSU gets hit more nationally, right? It's easier to judge the amenities like that than it is to judge the quality of the faculty. What else? Any other questions? How are we doing for time? Oh, just got a few more minutes. So you can go, that's fine. I don't like it when people walk out of class, but this is a review session. You can just come and go as you wish. Strictly voluntary. Yes.
Where would you say that Dewey and Hayek would fall on today's?
Where would Dewey and Hayek fall? Well, what do you think?
Definitely the classical liberalism or I would say conservative like free market ideas, and the modern liberalism, of course,
Yeah.
That was just.
Well, in general, that's true. The only catch to that is that the Conservative Party or the Republican Party has taken a turn under Mr. Trump away from the free market. So his extensive use of tariffs and all is an attempt to manage trade and economic life. And he's not trusting markets to bring manufacturing back. He's buying parts of some companies and requiring or finding ways to use the law to require domestic manufacture. Hayek would probably allow that with regard to defense industries. but I'm not sure he would more generally. But see, this becomes a little problematic because are computer chips part of defense or not? Well, they're clearly part of defense in the way that all modern missiles and the like that are being used, and the computer guidance systems and all of that. You couldn't run a modern military without extensive computers. So maybe there is a defense purpose in that, even though computers seem to be all around the economy and all through it. So that's created something of an issue now. It's not nearly as clear as it was, say, 10 years ago. So, good, yes.
In Wednesday's lecture, you mentioned Hayek kind of thought that people had this like misunderstanding of monopolies. I guess in like the present day, do you think that like Hayek thinks these companies that have like a huge control of the market, like that's just it'll sort itself out, or like?
Yes, I think it depends on the matter, but if usually a monopoly, a genuine monopoly requires some sort of role of the government to ensure it. So, and the example would be, look, 25 years ago, or let's say 30 years ago, it looked like Walmart, which had just arisen in the previous 10 years, was a dominant player in the provision of consumer goods. They were everywhere. They're building stores everywhere. They even had one or two at Baton Rouge. They were even starting to build in the smaller communities out and about. So some might have thought they were developing a kind of monopoly. But actually, along comes Amazon, which doesn't directly compete with them, but provides another way of supplying consumer goods. And then suddenly, I mean, Walmart's been able to survive and actually keep themselves as major players, but that's despite competition. And now Hayek would say, look, what you've got is actually an improvement, because now you've got readily available consumer goods at your local Walmart and readily available wider variety of things, I suppose, that could be shipped to you within a couple days. So that's a general improvement. And yet, if people have been striking at the monopoly of Walmart and saying, well, you have to set up other 5 and 10 stores and whatnot, probably along comes Amazon, and all those stores would have had more trouble competing with Amazon than Walmart did. And probably he would say you can see ways in which that's repeated throughout the market. I mean, a few years ago, well, I think there's still some suits about Google and its dominance of the search engine market. But all the new AI development, Google is struggling to keep up with that now, as best I understand it. And so there are now increasingly other sources that are competing with it. You know, there once looked like there was almost a monopoly of broadcast systems because there were only 3 major networks. But once things were opened up, and then you have all sorts of things broadcasting over the internet. Once the internet is there, it becomes a general available highway for people to use, and different internet providers you can buy from, and so forth. These are all competitive markets against each other. So it's harder to say where there's a monopoly. Now, the provision of electricity in most places still is a monopoly because it tends to run through wires. The wires had to be instituted by taking property or setting up lines along highways. And so that was thought to be monopolistic. And to some extent it is. But, it's probably not true that in 50 years everybody will have a generator, a nuclear generator in their backyard. But we already increasingly have these gas generators that people are installing for hurricanes. So there are other alternatives, and some people have the sunroofs, which are the solar panels, which are generating electricity at home. So there are competitive ways even of supplying something that was thought to be a monopoly. You know, water, well, yes, okay, you can't have lots of competing water pipe systems running through without a lot of disruption, but people buy water in all different ways now. It's hardly just by turning on the spigot. So there's, I think Hayek would be confident that there's a lot of competition. You can't say for sure what's competitive, what is. Because precisely if you have a free economy and a lot of opportunities and a lot of entrepreneurial spirit, people find ways of doing things in completely new ways.
So this might be a little tangential, but what would Hayek have thought about like a natural monopoly versus?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I
versus
think
like a
he's,
realized monopoly or an absolute.
I think he's skeptical that there are natural monopolies. I think he would say, in other words, you have to have a monopoly of electric provision, because I think we're seeing some extent to which there are other ways around that. Or even then, it might be that you have a monopoly of the lines, but you have a way of selling electricity over the grids. Texas experimented with that a while ago, not all that successfully.
With military.
Oh, well, yeah, but that's the state and the military. That's in a way outside the economy.
Including contracts and like.
Well, yeah, the provision of justice, right. So Hayek's willing to say those are state function, right? He is not willing to say there should be multiple, he's not a libertarian. I mean, the libertarian would say there's no, the true libertarian would say there's no natural list of things that only the state can do, like provide justice or provide defense. Rather, people can find their defense and contract in different ways for that. And even for justice, they can make contracts, hire arbitrators. Actually, a lot of justice is now supplied in that. All these little boxes with all that you check when you want software, with all the little fine print that you probably don't read, is all saying if you have a dispute with this company, it's going to some arbitration panel that's set up rather than the courts. So there is something of a market for justice in that way, but that develops. And I don't think you have an objection to that. At some level, he wouldn't have an objection. That's always happened, that merchants have developed ways of settling disputes because they can't wait for things to work themselves through the fullness of the courts. Good. Okay, well, those are good questions. Hope that was helpful to you, and see you Monday. Good luck. So long, folks online.